Hello, One Great Earth. My name is Dan. Thank you for joining me. Following up on the wildfires that plagued New Mexico, over 23,000 acres have been burned between two wildfires. The South Fork wildfire and the Salt fire. Ruidoso has been evacuated and at least 1,200 structures have believed to have been lost. There is at least one fatality linked to the wildfires. A lot of damage and destruction, a lot of buildings crumpled, a lot of unrecognizable spaces. Ruidoso has been evacuated and at least 1,200 structures. Two large fires burning on Ruidoso continued to grow as firefighters pursued containment efforts in the air and on the ground, according to the Southwest Area Incident and Fire Management Team. The South Fork fire burned around 16,335 acres as of Wednesday afternoon, and the Salt fire burned over 7,000 acres, read a press release from the agency. It's more than just wildfire. It's an intensity of the firestorm, the core of the storm that's burning through. That is a deeply misunderstood phenomenon, where it's the 700, 900 degree core of the storm that's moving like a front. It's not survivable. There's no way to wait it out. There's no oxygen to breathe. It's consuming everything. One of the scariest things that I could imagine as a homeowner, as even a renter, having to leave all of your belongings like these people did. It is unreal that so many dozens of stories that I've been reading of people just having to drop everything and go. Pets, medicine, and anything. They weren't able to save anything in their homes, their property, their belongings. It includes their animals and pets. Horses were tried to evacuate, but it's difficult. It's a long road to get to Roswell, where a lot of people were evacuating towards. But even over Roswell, the smoke was looking extremely concerning over the sky. So they're not out of the woods just yet, because the wildfire smoke can be dangerous as it spreads throughout the state. Now there's one more thing I wanted to bring up. Was Ruidoso is having extreme weather here. Just after these massive wildfires are burning, they're getting this extreme storm and heavy precipitation that's going to go over the South Fork fire. There are flash flood warnings in effect in these areas, especially with the burn scars acts as hydrophobic surface. When the ground is burned and hardened, the ground is hardened, water just glides right over it, not able to permeate through to the dirt, to the water table. As the soil in just a few inches probably burn. There's no telling how deep a fire burns. This is extreme weather that we're seeing here, between wildfires and flash flood warning and thunderstorm warning, wildfire warning, red flag warning. It's complicated to live in these areas where there's such heat and disaster is looming because of I don't want to speculate. They say that this was the result of arson, even if it's accidental. Sure, they'll investigate. It's the flash flood warning now that's in effect is especially warning. A lot of things are getting moved around, and from what video I've seen, a lot of homes and cars, vehicles are already gone, have been destroyed. Moving on.
Today in the UN Security Council, the U.S. said that famine has, quote, likely descended in Sudan and warned that indiscriminate attacks in the capital of Sudan's North Darfur region must stop. Al-Fashir was home to more than 800,000 internally displaced people before it came under siege by rebel paramilitaries. Already, Sudan was home to the world's largest displacement and hunger crises. And as Nick Schifrin reports, Al-Fashir has become a symbol of the country's suffering.
In Sudan's north, what was once a sanctuary is now under siege. The road to Al-Fashir, Sudan's last major city that hasn't fallen, is a battleground. Targeted by the rebel paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, who've been accused of ethnic cleansing. On the other side, Sudan's armed forces and its allies also accused of war crimes for bombing villages. And the fight tightens the noose around the most vulnerable. Al-Fashir was home to one of Sudan's final safe havens, and today the country's largest group of the displaced are at threat again.
In approximately 1 month of fighting, we have seen absolute catastrophe in Al-Fashir.
Nathaniel Raymond is the executive director of the Humanitarian Research Lab at the Yale School of Public Health. His team documents war crimes evidence through videos, open source data, and satellite imagery. He says Al-Fashir is dying.
In one 9-day period alone, almost 200 football fields worth of damage to civilian infrastructure was reported. I can't overemphasize for those watching this broadcast that the speed of destruction by fighters on the ground is almost unparalleled.
Satellite images show dozens of villages on Al-Fashir's outskirts burned, refugee camps devastated. And the UN says Al-Fashir's sole hospital that could perform surgeries has been looted and is shut down. The main targets are non-Arabs, as they were during Darfur's genocide in the 90s by the Rapid Support Forces precursor, the Janjaweed.
Rapid Support Forces are already engaged in ethnically targeted attacks within Al-Fashir. If the Rapid Support Forces capture Al-Fashir, they will be able to make Darfur their home base of operations to fight for control of Sudan for years to come.
430 days into this conflict, the level of human suffering in Sudan is intolerable.
Today at the Security Council, the UN warned that 2 million Sudanese are at risk of slipping into catastrophic hunger.
Every day that we wait for funding to come, more lives are at risk.
Outside countries have ignored US and UN demands and sent both sides weapons.
Without these foreign backers, the war would have ended quickly. The war is now into its second year because of arms shipments from multiple outside actors.
Last week, the Security Council passed a resolution demanding the end of the siege of Al-Fashir, called on countries to respect arms embargoes and not fuel the conflict by providing weapons. But the resolution has no enforcement mechanism. We now turn to Dr. Yasser El-Amin, president of the Sudanese American Physicians Association, who just left Sudan last week and joins us now from Cairo. Dr. Yasser El-Amin, thank you very much. Welcome back to the NewsHour. What did you see when you were there? How dire is the humanitarian crisis?
I visited a hospital in Durman, west of Khartoum, where patients or children with malnutrition are being treated. And I saw 3 children sharing a bed. Those children are being treated for malnutrition. They are skin and bone. They are just a testimony to the acute hunger that Sudan faces now. I've also witnessed the extreme limited resources that hospitals suffer from. Please remember that almost 60% of Sudan hospitals are non-operational at the moment.
So what you're seeing, what you're highlighting is 2 aspects, as you said, both the hunger and also the inability for doctors and hospitals to provide the medicine that's needed. Each of those cases you and I talked about when you were on the broadcast last year. Has it gotten much worse?
I think it has. And again, make no mistake, this is a man-made crisis. This is not due to a natural disaster. This is a decision by the SAF and by the RSF.
SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces, and RSF, Rapid Support Forces, the rebel paramilitary group.
Correct. This is my 2nd time that I've been to Sudan since the war erupted. And I could notice the worsening of the humanitarian crisis. And also I could witness the extreme sense of lawlessness. One of the things that I witnessed is that a lot of civilians are now carrying guns, carrying Kalashnikovs. When I went last year, there was a sense that there was still some sort of law, some sort of order, some sort of army being so strong and being able to control things. I have lost that sense when I visited Sudan last week.
One of the hotspots that we've highlighted today is Al-Fasher in Darfur. What is the impact of the fact that there's really only one healthcare facility available?
Well, it's clearly a complete disaster for a simple reason. This is a war zone. So there is indiscriminate bombing both by SAF and by the RSF. So there is great need for hospital services, let alone the other normal, ordinary, disease that the population would have. Al-Fasher has been a safe haven for hundreds of thousands of people who fled RSF. And the worry is if the RSF were to take the city, that there may be an ethnic, cleansing there, or there may be widespread violence and massacres happening inside Al-Fasher. So that's why Al-Fasher is particularly worrying, and the lack of health services there is even more worrying, especially when we may be faced by a crisis very soon.
And finally, Dr. El-Amin, how much has this war been defined by gender-based violence?
Sudan has known gender-based violence, but the scale of the gender-based violence in this war has been unprecedented. One of the very brutal aspects of this war is the amount of women, young girls in some cases, that were raped. When I was in Omdurman, I've heard horrible stories from physicians who've treated rape victims. We're talking about victims who are 16 years old, 15 years old. It's now something that's very routine when the RSF in particular takes over a place that mothers and elderly try to hide their younger sisters and daughters. Clearly, the majority of reported cases by credible sources, and certainly from talking to the physicians that I met in person in Omdurman now, most of the cases have been committed by RSF.
Dr. Yasser El-Amin, president of the Sudanese American Physicians Association, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ray.
At least 1 million people in Sudan are at immediate risk of famine. Very, very extreme circumstances. It looks to be escalating. Listen from The Guardian. More than 550 Hajj pilgrims die in Mecca as temperatures exceed 50 C. It'll be over 120 degrees. At least 320 of the dead are from Egypt and Saudi officials. From Egypt, and Saudi officials report treating more than 2,000 people for heat stress. At least 550 pilgrims have died during the Hajj, underscoring the grueling nature of the pilgrimage which again unfolded in scorching temperatures this year. At least 323 of those who died were Egyptians, most of them succumbing to heat-related illness. Two Arab diplomats coordinating their country's response told AFP. All of them died, as the Egyptians died, because of the heat, except for one who sustained fatal injuries during a minor crowd crush, one of the diplomats said, adding that the total figure came in from the hospital morgue in the El Museum neighborhood of Mecca. At least 60 Jordanians have died, the diplomat said, up from an official tally of 41 given earlier on Tuesday by Amman. The new deaths bring the total reported so far by multiple countries to 577, according to the AFP tally. The diplomat said the total at the morgue in El Wasim, one of the biggest in Mecca, was 550. Earlier on Tuesday, Egypt's foreign ministry said Cairo was collaborating with Saudi authorities on search operations for Egyptians who have gone missing during the Hajj. While the ministry's statement said a certain number of deaths had occurred, it did not specify which Egyptians were among them. Saudi authorities have reported treating more than 2,000 pilgrims suffering from heat stress, but have not updated that figure since Sunday and have not provided information on fatalities. At least 240 pilgrims were reported dead by various countries last year, most of them Indonesians. Temperatures hit 51.8 Celsius at the Grand Mosque in Mecca on Monday. Temperatures reaching over 120 degrees. People are told to bring umbrella, drink plenty of water, avoid direct contact with the sun. When you start walking around, you can't stop. You're in it too. I mean, try getting out of it. It'll be difficult. To go in tandem with so many people. About 1.8 million pilgrims took part in the Hajj this year. Big tourism money for Saudi Arabia. And it's so unfortunate to hear people dying like this. It's pain and suffering. Get to the point that you no longer can sweat. Sweating no longer gives you the benefit of cooling. And you're around people, other bodies that are at the same core temperature. Unreal. Alright, well, this is a short one today. I do have other news as a bonus article. U.S. acknowledges Northwest dams have devastated the region's native tribes. Seattle. The U.S. government on Tuesday acknowledged federal acknowledgement. The U.S. government on Tuesday acknowledged for the first time the harmful role it has played over the past century in building and operating dams in the Pacific Northwest, dams that devastated Native American tribes by inundating their villages and decimating salmon runs while bringing electricity, irrigation, and jobs to nearby communities. In a new report, the Biden administration said those culture, spiritual, and economic detriments continue to pain the tribes, which consider salmon part of their culture and spiritual identity, as well as a crucial food source. The government downplayed or accepted the well-known risks of the fishing and strive for industrial development, converting the wealth of the tribes into the wealth of the non-native people, according to the report. The government afforded little, if any, consideration to the devastation the dams would bring to tribal communities, including to their cultures, sacred sites, economies, and homes, the report said. It added, despite decades of efforts and an enormous amount of funding attempting to mitigate these impacts, salmon stocks remain threatened or endangered, and continued operation of the dams perpetuates the myriad adverse effects. The Interior Department's report comes amid a $1 billion USD effort announced earlier this year to restore the region's salmon runs before more become extinct, and to better partner with the tribes on the actions necessary to make that happen. That includes increasing the production and storage of renewable energy to replace hydropower generation that could be lost if 4 dams on the lower Snake River are ever breached. Tribes, conservationists, and even federal scientists say they would be the best hope for recovering the salmon, providing the fish with access to hundreds of miles of pristine habitat and spawning grounds in Ohio. Northwest Republicans in Congress and some business and utility groups oppose breaching the dams, saying it would jeopardize an important shipping route for farmers and throw off clean energy goals. That doesn't sound very important. You don't want the salmon to go extinct. This run of the salmon to go extinct even, rather. Not all salmon, but if they stop using this, they won't be able to use it. No more salmon. How many more rivers can we withstand before the salmon stop running altogether? President Biden recognizes that to confront injustice, we must be honest about history, even when doing so is difficult. Said a statement from White House Counsel on Environmental Quality Chair Brenda Mallory and Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Native American Cabinet Secretary. In the Pacific Northwest, an open and candid conversation about the history and legacy of the federal government's management of the Columbia River is long overdue. The document was a requirement of an agreement last year to halt decades of legal fights over the operation of the dams. It lays out how government and private interests in the early 20th century began walling off tributaries of the Columbia River, the largest in the Northwest, to provide water for irrigation or flood control, compounding the damage that was already being caused to water quality and salmon runs by mining, logging, and rapacious salmon cannery operations. Don't buy canned salmon. Tribal representatives said, like, it's such a glorious, amazing fish, and it's so gross, canned salmon. Salmon themselves, or was I? Sorry. The report was accompanied by an announcement of a new task force to coordinate salmon recovery efforts across federal agencies. Tribal representatives said they were gratified with the administration's formal, if long-belated, acknowledgement of how the U.S. government ignored their treaty-based fishing rights and their concerns about how the dams would affect their people. The salmon themselves have been suffering the consequences since the dams were first put in, said Shannon Wheeler, chairman of the Nez Perce tribe. The lack of salmon eventually starts affecting us, but they're the ones that have been suffering longest. It feels like there's an opportunity to end the suffering. Salmon are born in rivers and migrate far downstream to the ocean, where they spend their adult lives before returning to their natal rivers, spawn and die. Dams can disrupt that by cutting off access to upstream habitat and by slowing and warming water to the point that fish die. The Columbia River Basin, an area roughly the size of Texas, was once the world's greatest salmon-producing river system, with as many 16 million salmon and steelhead returning every year to spawn. Now scientists say about 2 million salmon and steelhead return to the Columbia and its tributaries each year. About 2/3 of them hatchery raised. The Shoshone-Bannock tribe in southeastern Idaho said it once harvested enough salmon for each tribal member to have 700 pounds of fish in a year. Today, the average harvest barely yields 1 pound per tribal member. Of the 16 stocks of salmon and steelhead that once populated the river system, 4 are extinct and 7 are listed under the Endangered Species Act. Another iconic but endangered Northwest species, a population of killer whales, also depend on the salmon. There has been growing recognition across the U.S. that harms some dams cause the fish to outweigh their usefulness. Dams on the Elwha River in Washington State and the Klamath River along the Oregon-California border has been or are being removed. The construction of the first dams on the main Columbia River, including the Great Coulee and Bonneville dams in the 1930s provided jobs to a country grappling with the Great Depression, as well as hydropower and navigation. As early as the late 1930s, tribes were warning that salmon runs could disappear, with the fish no longer able to access spawning grounds upstream. The tribes, the Yakama Nation, Spokane Tribe, Confederate tribes of the Colville and Umatilla reservations, Nez Perce, and others continued to fight the construction and operation of the dams for decades. Tom Iverson, regional coordinator for Yakama Nation Fisheries, said that while the report was gratifying, it remains hopes and promises until funding for salmon restoration and renewable power projects come through Congress. With these agreements, there is hope. We feel like there's a moment. I feel like this is a moment in time. If it doesn't happen now, it will be too late. You're seeing just a dramatic reduction of spawning salmon that go upstream. Sad for the fish, sad for the tribes, and it's sad for the white men not to be able to inwardly think and look in yourself and look at nature in such a way that you can see that you're doing great harm to nature. And it shouldn't have to take 100 years. When the tribes were telling you during the first years that this was being erected, that the fish runs will die. Now we have to do the right thing and swoop in and act like we're the heroes and take down these dams. So much suffering as a result of it. Alright, I thank you for, if you haven't already, liking the stream, subscribing to the channel. It helps me out immensely and keeps me motivated in doing climate related videos like this. The big admission here, the big federal admission. The Northwest dams have devastated not only the native tribes, their culture, but also salmon. Stops them from going upstream to spawn and die. That's what they're doing, and we're stopping that. So I think it's been more than enough time, because these dams, renewable energy should be able to offset the hydroelectric needs. So hope. We'll see. Alright, I thank you again. Please, take care.